endocrine system. So first off, I want to start by defining a hormone. A hormone is a chemical messenger that acts as a signaling system for the body. So it basically tells the body to do certain things at certain times. And there are different glands or organs that either make these hormones or can respond to them. So the three main types of hormones are amino acid-based hormones who attach to receptors outside of the cell, and they are also water soluble. And then there are steroids who attach to receptors inside of the cell, and steroids are fat soluble and derived from cholesterol. And then eicosanoids are your local hormones, and there are two basic types. There are leukotrienes and prostaglandins. Leukotrienes help to promote inflammation, and prostaglandins help to raise blood pressure and also promote clotting. Now I want to talk about upregulation and downregulation. This basically is talking about how sensitive a cell or a target organ is to a hormone. So upregulation is pretty much when a target cell makes more receptors for a hormone, therefore making it more sensitive to the hormone. And downregulation is when a cell makes less receptors for a hormone, therefore making it less sensitive to the hormone. So now there are many different types of effects of hormones. We're going to talk about 5 basic ones. So hormones can either alter membrane permeability, stimulate protein synthesis, activate or deactivate enzymes, cause secretory activity, or stimulate mitosis. So now I'm going to talk about the 2 different ways that a hormone can enter a cell. So the first way that I'm going to talk about is the second messenger system, and this is used by amino acid-based or water-soluble hormones. So as I said earlier, amino acid-based hormones deal with receptors that are on the outside of the cell. So basically the way that this works is that the hormone acts as the first messenger when it binds to the receptor, and see, this is the plasma membrane. So the hormone acts as the first messenger when it binds to the receptor. And then the G protein, which is down here, and now we're inside the cell. So the G protein relays this signal and acts as a signal transducer to relay the signal to adenylate cyclase. This can either stimulate or it can inhibit CAMP production. So if it stimulates CAMP production, adenylate cyclase is going to make CAMP from ATP. So CAMP is very similar to ATP, except it is 1 phosphate instead of 3. So M for mono instead of T for tri. So adenylate cyclase is going to make CAMP from ATP, and then CAMP is going to initiate enzymatic reactions, as you can see here. And then once CAMP has done its job, it's going to be rapidly broken down by phosphodiesterase. So again, that's how the system works if it is an amino acid-based or water-soluble hormone. The other option is direct gene activation. Direct gene activation is used by steroid hormones. So like I said earlier, the receptor is inside of the cell for steroid hormones because these steroids can penetrate the semi-permeable membrane. So the steroid hormone is going to enter the cell, and it's going to bind to this red thing, which is the intracellular receptor. And then this hormone receptor complex is going to enter the nucleus. And once it enters the nucleus, it's going to sit on the DNA, which are these purple strands here, and it's basically going to tell that DNA to make a specific protein. So what will happen is that then the DNA will make mRNA, which will then cause protein synthesis, as we learned about in AMP1. So again, the second messenger system is used for amino acid-based hormones, and direct gene activation is used for steroid hormones. So now I want to spend a little bit of time discussing this diagram that you will draw in class. So basically this is the pituitary gland, and these are the main hormones that come out of the pituitary gland. So this is the anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis, and the posterior pituitary or the neurohypophysis. So the anterior pituitary makes 6 hormones, and the posterior pituitary stores 2 hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus, which would be up here, because the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland via the infundibulum. So I'm going to start off with the anterior pituitary. So I wrote down all the abbreviations, but I'll tell you each of the names for them. So in the anterior pituitary, growth hormone is made. Growth hormone targets general body cells and it causes growth, especially in bone and muscle. Prolactin targets the breasts and it causes milk production. TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, targets the follicular cells of the thyroid and causes the release of T3, T4, or thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone then targets general body cells in order to raise the basal metabolic rate, which is basically how many calories you're burning when you're sitting and doing nothing. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, targets the adrenal cortex and causes the release of cortisol. Cortisol then targets the general body cells and causes healing. Now, these two hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, both target the gonads and they cause gamete and sex hormone production. So follicle-stimulating hormone causes gamete production, which would basically be the production of eggs in females or sperm in males. And then LH, luteinizing hormone, causes sex hormone production, which would be estrogen and progesterone in females and testosterone in males. So now the posterior pituitary stores these two hormones, again made by the hypothalamus. So the first one is oxytocin. Oxytocin targets both the breasts and the uterus. In the breasts, it causes milk ejection, and in the uterus, it causes labor contractions. ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, targets the kidneys, and it causes the reabsorption of water, which decreases urine production. So that's the basic diagram, and now I'm going to go into more detail about each one of the endocrine glands. Okay, so now that we've talked about the pituitary gland, let's move on to the thyroid. The thyroid gland has several different types of cells that make different hormones. So this is an example, this is a drawing of the thyroid gland, and it basically has two lobes and is connected in the middle by the isthmus. Now over here I've drawn sort of like a microscopic version of when you look at the thyroid tissue, for example, in lab, this is what it will kind of look like. So this circular area in the middle is called a colloid, and then these cells around the colloid are called follicular cells. So like I said earlier, follicular cells make thyroid hormone, which targets general body cells in order to raise basal metabolic rate. We also have parafollicular cells, which make calcitonin, which lowers blood calcium levels. So the two hormones that come out of the thyroid gland are calcitonin and thyroid hormone. Now we also have the parathyroid glands, which are these four bumps on the back of the thyroid gland. So the parathyroid glands make PTH, or parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone helps to raise blood calcium levels. So parathyroid hormone and calcitonin basically do opposite things. So that's the thyroid gland. Now we're going to move on to the adrenal glands. So there are two adrenal glands, or sometimes they're called suprarenal glands because they sit on top of the kidneys. And the adrenal glands basically have a cortex and a medulla. The cortex makes the two hormones cortisol and aldosterone. I already talked about cortisol, which targets general body cells and helps to promote healing. And cortisol is a hormone that is released when adrenocorticotropic hormone from the pituitary gland targets the adrenal cortex. It's cortisol that's released, not aldosterone. Aldosterone basically targets your kidneys and it helps cause the reuptake of sodium. You've learned about the renin-angiotensin mechanism. It's pretty much related to that. And then the medulla is targeted by fear. So you've heard a lot about the fight or flight method. This is where this comes from. So fear targets the medulla, which then makes epinephrine and norepinephrine, which causes your fight or flight response. Now I'm going to talk about the pancreas. The pancreas is very important for our bodies, and it has both endocrine and exocrine functions. So there are two basically main parts of the pancreas that you need to know. The first part is acinar cells, which help make digestive enzymes for the body, and then also pancreatic islets, also sometimes called islets of Langerhans. So there are three different types of cells that are made within the pancreatic islets. So alpha cells, beta cells, and delta cells. Alpha cells make glucagon, which helps to increase blood sugar levels. So I'm going to put an arrow up. It helps to increase blood sugar levels. Beta cells make insulin, which helps to decrease blood sugar levels. And then delta cells make somatostatin, which basically, as you probably know, is the major turn-off hormone. But in this case, somatostatin helps to slow down the production of digestive juices. Now I'm going to talk about a few other structures that serve endocrine functions. So the pineal gland makes melatonin, which you probably know helps to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. The kidneys make erythropoietin, which causes red blood cell production. The thymus gland makes the hormone thymosin, which helps to stimulate T cell maturation or differentiation. And finally, the skin makes cholecalciferol, which is a precursor to active vitamin D, and vitamin D helps to promote the reabsorption of calcium. So now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about clinical problems. It's very important to know these because as Mr. B will tell you on the test, there are several, I think 7 matching questions where you have to basically match the disease to its definition. So I'm going to start off with gigantism. Gigantism is a hypersecretion of growth hormone as a child. So I'm going to put hypersecretion up arrow of growth hormone, and I'm going to put a C. So hypersecretion of growth hormone as a child. And then the next one is acromegaly, which is also hypersecretion of growth hormone, but it's as an adult. So hypersecretion, growth hormone as an adult. Now pituitary dwarfism is the opposite. So it's hyposecretion of growth hormone. Diabetes insipidus is hyposecretion of antidiuretic hormone. So hyposecretion of antidiuretic hormone, which would therefore increase urine production. Cretinism in infants is a hyposecretion of thyroid hormone. So a hyposecretion of thyroid hormone, also known as T3, T4. This is usually some characteristics of this would be the infants would be mentally challenged, or they would have thickened tongues and thickened necks. And then myxedema in adults is also the hyposecretion of thyroid hormone T3, T4. And in adults, what this looks like is basically, since thyroid hormone helps to raise your basal metabolic rate, myxedema or hyposecretion of thyroid hormone, which would mean that you would have a low basal metabolic rate, your skin would be thickened and you'd be very lethargic. Now moving on to Graves' disease. Graves' disease is the opposite. It is a hypersecretion of thyroid hormone, T3, T4. So what this looks like is you have a very high metabolic rate, because if you have a lot of thyroid hormone, which already raises your metabolic rate, then if there's a hypersecretion of this hormone, you would have a very high metabolic rate. It also causes sweating, profusion of the eyeballs. Sometimes you see people where it looks like their eyeballs are kind of, they look a little bit bigger. That could be characteristic of Graves' disease. Cushing's syndrome is hypersecretion of cortisol. So hypersecretion of cortisol. Now you might think, oh, this is good. Well, cortisol causes healing, so why wouldn't I want more of it? Well, hypersecretion of cortisol basically gives you physical differences from other people. They call it a moon face and a buffalo hump. It basically makes your face look very flat, and then you get a buffalo hump on the back of your neck, on the lower part of your neck area. And then Addison's disease would be the opposite of Cushing's syndrome. So it is a hyposecretion of cortisol, which would mean that you would lose weight, you'd become dehydrated, and you could also have hypotension. And then finally, diabetes mellitus, which is pretty much the classic diabetes that we know today. Some symptoms of this include polyuria, polyphagia, and polydipsia. So what these basically mean, polyuria is frequent urination, polyphagia is always being hungry, and polydipsia is always being thirsty. So then there are two types of diabetes, as you probably know. Type 1 diabetes is juvenile onset. You have it like as a kid, and basically your body doesn't make insulin, so you're insulin dependent. Type 2 diabetes is adult onset diabetes, and it means you're not insulin dependent, but it basically means you need to change your lifestyle, like maybe become more active, eat healthier foods, etc. So that pretty much wraps up the endocrine system. I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching.